Hey there! It's been a while, but I've got another story to share with you today. Now, before we dive in, I want to tell you straight off the bat, this one's a bit of a gut punch. So, if you're here for some lighthearted, feel-good stuff, maybe skip this one. But if you're in the mood for a wild ride of betrayal, self-discovery, and a whole lot of revenge, stick around. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. So, let me introduce myself first. My name's Tom, but you can call me Tommy if you like. I'm in my early 40s now, but the last few years, man, they've aged me. I live in a suburb just outside of Chicago with my wife, Rachel. We've been married for 16 years. No kids, just the two of us, living what I thought was a pretty good life. We both work from home, me in marketing and Rachel as a freelance graphic designer. It's been a pretty stable rhythm. I'd take care of the work, and Rachel would spend her days in front of her laptop, creating designs for clients. Our marriage, it was solid. At least that's what I thought. You know, the usual stuff. We'd have dinner together, talk about our days, watch a few shows, and enjoy the quiet moments of just being with each other. I'd be lying if I said it was always perfect, but honestly, I figured, who has a perfect marriage, right? We'd been through some ups and downs. Money issues, work stress, the usual, but nothing I'd ever considered a threat to what we had. But that all changed one night, and it felt like my world came crashing down around me. And to be honest, I didn't see it coming. Not at all. So, let me rewind to the start of it all. About 6 months ago, everything seemed normal. Rachel was doing her usual routine. Up early in the morning, grabbing a coffee, and sitting down at the kitchen table with her laptop. Me? I was working, like always, in the spare room we'd converted into an office. For a while, things felt almost too predictable. You know, the kind of calm that eventually starts to feel like routine. But as it turns out, routine is where the cracks start to show. Let me tell you how it all went down. One night, Rachel stayed up a bit later than usual working on a big design project. I was already in bed by the time she came into the bedroom. She kissed me on the cheek and went straight to the bathroom. Now, don't get me wrong. Nothing too unusual about that. But there was something off. I couldn't quite place it, but I felt like I was being, I don't know, ignored? She wasn't paying attention to me like she usually did. And I'll admit, I brushed it off at first. She was probably just tired, or maybe she had a lot of stress at work. We all have those days, right? But then it happened again the next night. And then again. And soon, it became clear that something was up. The tension between us grew, but I didn't say anything at first. I figured I'd let it blow over. Maybe it was just a phase, right? That's when I started noticing things. Small things at first. I'd walk into the kitchen, and Rachel would quickly close her laptop when I came in. I'd glance at her phone on the table, and she'd immediately swipe it away, like she was hiding something. And those late nights, well, they started happening more frequently. I mean, I'm not a jealous guy, but this was definitely starting to raise some red flags. And I'll admit, my gut was telling me that something wasn't right. So what did I do? I took the low road. I decided to dig a little deeper. Now, before you judge me, let me explain. I wasn't spying on her, per se, but I was noticing enough patterns that I wanted to make sure I wasn't just overreacting. I started checking up on her social media, seeing who she was talking to online. And that's when I found it. I didn't have to search long. Rachel, who always seemed like the most loyal, down-to-earth person I knew, was talking to someone. Someone new. Someone who seemed to be more than just a work colleague. At first, I couldn't believe it. But the messages were there, plain as day, casual at first, then a little too familiar until they were downright flirty. And that's when it hit me. My wife, the woman I thought I knew inside and out, had been hiding something from me. Something big. I won't lie to you. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Couldn't believe it. I felt like my world had been turned upside down. But there was no denying what I was seeing. And as much as I wanted to confront her right there and then, I knew I had to think this through. I needed to know more. I needed to be sure. So, I did what anyone in my situation might do. I hired a private investigator. I know, it sounds dramatic, but I needed answers. I wasn't about to confront her without the whole truth. If she was really cheating, I needed to know exactly who it was and what they were up to. I hired a guy named Jack. He was a pro, came highly recommended, and was well-versed in the kind of surveillance I needed. I gave him the details, and within a few days, he had gathered the information. It wasn't just messages or phone calls anymore. Rachel was meeting up with this guy. In fact, she'd been meeting him several times a week, in the middle of the day, under the pretense of client meetings or working lunches. But Jack had followed her, and the truth was crystal clear. It was an affair, and it was happening right under my nose. The betrayal hit hard, harder than I expected. I had always trusted Rachel. We had built this life together, and now I was finding out she had been hiding something as monumental as this. The first confrontation came soon after I got the full report. I remember that night like it was yesterday. Rachel came home late again, looking exhausted but still trying to act like everything was fine. We had dinner, and then I asked her to sit down with me. "Rachel, we need to talk," I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible. She looked at me, almost too casually, like she wasn't worried at all. "About what?" "About you and him," I said, my voice shaking slightly as I showed her the screenshots of her conversations with this guy. Her face turned pale the second she saw the evidence. Her mouth opened, but no words came out at first. "You've been cheating on me, Rachel," I said, my heart racing. "And now you don't get to lie about it." Well, there it was. The truth was out. But that wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. And trust me, you won't believe what happened next. But that's a story for later. For now, let's just say that things were about to take a turn I wasn't expecting. Stay tuned, because the next part? It's where the real drama begins. That's the first part of my story. Stick with me, folks. We've got a long way to go. And trust me, it's worth the ride. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for the next part. Alright, folks, welcome back. If you're just tuning in, don't worry. I've got you covered. So far, I've told you about how I found out that my wife, Rachel, was cheating on me. It hit me like a freight train, and trust me, I wasn't prepared for the betrayal. But I've made it this far, and I'm not done yet. I'm gonna break it all down for you so you know exactly what went down after that big confrontation. So, like I said before, I confronted Rachel and she was speechless. I didn't expect that silence. I thought she'd come up with some kind of excuse, some kind of lie to cover her tracks. But no, there was nothing. And, to be honest, that scared me more than anything. The air was thick with tension as she sat there, staring at the screen, her face pale. She opened her mouth, but words failed her. I couldn't believe what was happening. Here we were, sitting across from each other with this mountain of evidence between us. Our marriage, our life together, all of it crumbling in front of me. After what felt like forever, Rachel finally spoke. "Tom, I don't know what to say," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for this to happen." That line. I didn't mean for this to happen. It was such a cliché, wasn't it? But it didn't make it any less painful. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, almost laughing through the pain. "You didn't mean for this to happen? Rachel, you've been seeing this guy for months. This isn't just some slip-up. You've been hiding this from me. For months." She took a deep breath, her eyes finally meeting mine. "I'm so sorry, Tom. I never wanted to hurt you. It just happened." Right then, I knew I wasn't talking to the woman I married anymore. This wasn't the person I'd spent all these years with. This was a stranger. And that realization, it stung. It stung worse than I could ever put into words. "I can't believe this," I muttered, pacing the room. "I thought we were happy. I thought you were happy." Rachel's eyes were filled with tears now, but I wasn't buying it. It was the same act I'd seen 1,000 times. The tears, the apologies, it was all too late for that. The anger started to rise in me, and I had to choke it down, take a step back. I couldn't let her see how badly she'd broken me. "I'm done, Rachel," I said quietly. "I'm done." And that was it. The end of the conversation. Rachel started crying, begging for forgiveness, but I was numb. She could beg and apologize all she wanted, but the damage was done. What could she say? That she was sorry for cheating on me? That was the least of my worries at that point. That night I didn't sleep. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything. The lies, the secrets, the guilt. How long had this been going on? Had she been lying to me all these years? Or was this something new? Was it something that had always been there and just got worse over time? I don't have the answers to any of those questions. But what I did know was that I was not going to let this go. Not yet. I had to make sure I understood everything. The next few days were a blur. I moved out of our bedroom and into the guest room, and Rachel barely said a word to me. She knew what she'd done, and she knew I was done with her. But it wasn't just about her. I was angry, so damn angry. Not just at her, but at myself too. How could I have been so blind? How could I have not seen the signs? I didn't know what to do, so I did what I thought was best. I started to gather the facts. I started to dig into the affair, and what I found only made it worse. I called the private investigator again. Jack had given me the full report, but I needed more details. I wanted to know everything. Who was this guy? What was his deal? Jack didn't waste any time. He gave me the name, Derek Richards. 38, married, no kids. A middle manager at a small tech company. And here's the kicker. He and Rachel had been meeting for more than just work. They'd met up at hotels, at restaurants, even at parks. It wasn't just casual flirtation, it was an affair. The worst part? He wasn't just some random guy. No, Rachel had known him for years. They'd crossed paths before, at work events, mutual friends. This was someone she'd known for a long time. And that made it hurt even more. This wasn't some one-night stand or some random guy off the internet. This was someone she'd chosen to spend time with. Someone she trusted. I needed to confront Derek. I had to. Not just for me, but for Rachel's sake too. She had no idea I knew about him. And she didn't know what I was planning. I wasn't going to let her continue her double life. I spent the next few days setting everything up. Jack kept me updated, following Derek around to get a sense of his routine. It was time for the next phase. I had to confront him. And trust me, this wasn't going to be pretty. And right when I was gearing up to confront Derek, I got a phone call. It was Rachel. "Tom, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaky. "Can you come home? Please." At first, I was hesitant. What more could she say? What more could she possibly tell me that would make a difference? But I knew deep down that I needed closure. I needed to understand what was going on, even if it hurt like hell. I drove home, my mind racing the whole way. Was she going to apologize? Was she going to beg for forgiveness again? What was her angle now? When I got there, she was sitting at the kitchen table, looking exhausted. She didn't even get up when I walked in. There was no welcoming smile, no warmth in her eyes, just emptiness. "Sit down, Tom," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I sat down, waiting for her to speak. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she started, her voice quiet, "about what I've done. And I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to understand that I didn't want this." "You didn't want this?" I repeated, a laugh escaping my lips, but it wasn't a happy laugh. "Rachel, you made choices. You knew exactly what you were doing." She flinched, but then she steadied herself. I know, and I'm sorry, but I didn't want to lose you. I didn't know how to fix things, Tom. And when Derek came along, it was just easy. He understood me. He listened." I stared at her. "So this is about him? Derek?" She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know it doesn't make sense. I'm sorry. I don't know why I did it. It was a mistake. A huge mistake. I'm willing to do anything to make things right." And there it was. The apology I'd been waiting for. But I didn't feel relief. No, all I felt was numb. "Well, Rachel," I said, standing up, "I've got a decision to make. And you don't get to be part of it anymore." That was it. I knew it was time to take action. No more talking. No more apologies. It was time for me to do what I needed to do. Before I move on to the next step, let me just say this isn't the end of the story. The real drama, the real revenge, is about to unfold. So stick around. You won't want to miss what happens next. And of course, if you're enjoying this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment too. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Stay tuned. The next part's going to be intense. As days passed, the unease in Andrew's gut grew. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong with his marriage. Karen had been distant, and the signs of her affair, though subtle, were undeniable. At first, it had just been the late nights and the odd, unexplained absences. But as time went on, Andrew began to notice small, seemingly insignificant changes. Her phone being hidden, the way her texts made her smile, and how quickly she would shut her laptop when he walked into the room. Despite all the mounting evidence, Andrew still held onto a shred of hope. Maybe it was his own insecurities talking, maybe he was just paranoid. But deep down, he knew that this was no longer about intuition. It was about hard facts. The breaking point came one evening when Andrew came home early from work and caught Karen in the middle of a conversation on the phone. Her voice, usually warm and steady, was a low whisper, but the tone of the conversation told Andrew everything he needed to know. The words were too flirtatious, too intimate. "Yeah, I miss you too. We need to plan another getaway soon." That was it. The final straw. Andrew's heart raced as he stood frozen at the doorway, hearing his wife, his partner for 25 years, talking to someone who wasn't him. Karen's face flushed when she saw him standing there. The phone call ended abruptly. "Who was that?" Andrew asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Karen, ever the skilled liar, attempted to recover quickly. "Oh, it was just a colleague from work. We were discussing some project ideas." But Andrew wasn't buying it. The guilt in her eyes was too obvious. The defensiveness in her posture too familiar. He'd seen it before and he knew it well. Something had to be done. The next morning, he decided to take a drastic step. He contacted a private investigator, someone who could uncover the truth once and for all. Andrew knew it was time to stop asking questions and start getting answers. This was no longer about trust. It was about confronting the harsh reality of what his wife had been hiding. As Andrew began his investigation, the weight of his decisions started to hit him. He was no longer just a betrayed husband. He was a man with a mission. Every day felt like an emotional roller coaster. He spent long hours at work, only to return home to an empty house, haunted by the growing distance between him and Karen. The private investigator, a grizzled man named Tony, started sending Andrew small updates. Karen's movements, her activities, and even her late-night phone calls. All of it was meticulously documented. Andrew hated every second of it, but he couldn't stop. He had to know the full extent of her betrayal. During this time, Andrew's internal conflict deepened. He had always prided himself on being calm and composed, but now he found himself questioning everything about his life. Was Karen's betrayal the result of something he had done or failed to do? Had he been a neglectful husband, wrapped up in his work, while she sought out the affection she was missing elsewhere? But the more Andrew dug, the more he realized that it wasn't about him. Karen had chosen to cheat, and now he had to deal with the consequences. The breakthrough came a week later. Tony sent Andrew an email with undeniable proof. Karen was having an affair with a man named Dave, someone from her yoga class. The man was younger, charismatic, and, from what Andrew could tell, everything he wasn't. The realization hit hard. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the fact that his entire marriage had been built on lies. Andrew was crushed, but he was also furious. This wasn't just about being cheated on. It was about the betrayal of everything he had worked for, the life, the family, the trust. He couldn't fathom how Karen had so easily dismissed the years of love they had shared. But it was clear now. Andrew had been living in a lie. His perfect world, his career, his family was crumbling around him. And Karen had been the architect of his downfall. The next few days were a blur of emotions. Andrew started making plans. He needed to confront Karen, but he also wanted to make her realize the full weight of what she had done. The idea of revenge, of making her pay for her actions, began to creep into his mind. But he knew he had to be careful. This was a delicate game, and he couldn't let his emotions get the best of him. He had to play it smart, just as Karen had been doing. Andrew's decision was made. He would confront Karen, but not just in any way, he would do it on his terms. He would expose her infidelity in the most humiliating way possible, making sure she understood the gravity of her betrayal. The plan involved two things: exposing the affair in front of their daughters, and making sure their close circle of friends knew exactly what had been going on behind the scenes. Karen's perfect image, the life she had been so carefully crafting, would be shattered. As the day of confrontation approached, Andrew's tension mounted. He wasn't sure what Karen's reaction would be, but he was ready. He had spent the last few days putting together the pieces of the puzzle. The emails, the photos, the text messages. Everything was ready. Finally, the day arrived. Andrew waited for Karen to return home from her day at work, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew the moment of truth was coming. When Karen walked through the door that evening, she immediately sensed that something was off. The air was thick with tension. Andrew stood by the kitchen counter, arms crossed, his face unreadable. "Andrew, what's going on?" Karen asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. Andrew took a deep breath, his emotions a whirlwind inside him. "We need to talk." As Karen sat down across from him, her nervousness was palpable. She could sense that this conversation was not going to be like the others. Andrew slid a folder across the table. Inside were the photos, the messages, and the receipts from her affair with Dave. Karen's face drained of color as she began to flip through the evidence. For the first time, she was speechless. "How long has this been going on?" Andrew asked, his voice steady but cold. Karen struggled to speak, but the weight of her guilt was too much. She finally whispered, I didn't want to hurt you. It just happened." Andrew's eyes hardened. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I wouldn't see the signs?" The confrontation continued, but this time, it was no longer about love or understanding. It was about justice, Andrew's justice. Stay tuned for the next part of the story. If you're enjoying the tale of Andrew's journey, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. We've got more intense twists and turns coming up, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The atmosphere in the room was thick with the tension of Andrew's revelation. Karen sat frozen, her eyes darting from the folder he had placed before her to his face, where every inch of his expression seemed to scream disappointment and betrayal. She didn't say anything at first, as if trying to process what was happening, what was being thrown in her face. Andrew didn't give her a chance to gather her thoughts. His anger bubbled up, and with each passing second, it became more difficult for him to remain calm. He had been patient for too long, watching her spin her web of lies and deceit. But now was the time to confront her, to make her understand the gravity of what she had done. "You told me you loved me, Karen. You told me that we were in this together," Andrew said, his voice a tight, controlled whisper. "And now I find this. Your affair, your lies, everything." He slammed his hand down on the table, making Karen flinch. "How long were you going to keep this going? How long did you think I wouldn't find out?" Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her eyes watering. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. The guilt, the fear, the shame. It all weighed on her in that moment, a burden that had become too heavy to bear.
"I'm sorry, Andrew."
"I never meant to hurt you," she finally said, her voice trembling. It just happened. And I never wanted you to find out like this." Andrew's laugh was bitter, almost derisive. "Really? It just happened? For months, Karen. Months. You've been lying to me for months. I built this life, this family, thinking that everything was fine. And all the while you were with him." His voice cracked, a mix of anger and hurt. "How could you?" "Please, Andrew," Karen whispered, her voice barely audible now. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt our family." Andrew shook his head. His heart was pounding in his chest, his pulse racing, but he knew what had to come next. There was no turning back now. "You've already hurt me. You've hurt me in ways that will never be fixed. And our family? What about our family, Karen? What do we do with that? The years we've spent together? The memories? The daughters we've raised?" Karen's face crumpled as she broke down in tears, covering her face with her hands. It was all too much, the confrontation, the guilt, the fear of losing everything. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Andrew. I was stupid. I was selfish. I was looking for something I couldn't find in our marriage. But I never stopped loving you, she cried, her voice thick with regret. Andrew stood up abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. He could feel the weight of her words, but they didn't make things better. The damage had already been done. Love? Love is something you don't throw away so easily. Something you don't replace with lies. You think saying sorry is enough? His voice had risen now, the anger flowing freely, no longer controlled. How could you do this to me, Karen? To us? His fists clenched at his sides as he paced back and forth, trying to hold on to some semblance of control. Karen's sobs filled the silence in the room, but Andrew couldn't bring himself to feel sorry for her. She had made her choice, and now she had to face the consequences. He had known this day would come, but the weight of it still hit him like a ton of bricks. For 25 years, he had believed in their marriage, in their life together. He had poured everything into it, just to watch it crumble right before his eyes. Andrew, please, Karen whispered through her tears, standing up and reaching for him. But he pulled away. No, he said, his voice low and firm. I can't do this anymore. I can't be with someone who's been lying to me for so long. I can't trust you anymore. Not after everything you've done. His words were like a dagger to her heart, but Andrew knew they were the truth. I think it's time we figure out what comes next. What comes after all of this? For the next few days, the house was eerily silent. The usual rhythm of their lives, the small, mundane routines that made up their days, had come to a screeching halt. Andrew could barely look at Karen without feeling the sting of betrayal. Every room felt colder. Every object felt more foreign. He could no longer pretend that everything was normal. During this time, Andrew's emotions swung from anger to sorrow to a cold, calculated numbness. He had always been the steady one, the logical one. But now, every decision felt fraught with consequences. His mind raced with thoughts of what to do next, whether to fight for his marriage, to try to forgive Karen, or whether it was time to move on. But in the midst of his confusion, there was one thing that was clear. Karen's betrayal had shattered something inside him, and he knew deep down that he could never go back to the life they once had. The love he had for her had been poisoned by the lies, the deceit, and the fact that everything he thought he knew about his wife had been turned upside down. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the life that had been built on a lie. His trust had been broken, and no matter how much Karen apologized, he knew that the foundation of their marriage had crumbled beyond repair. The next phase of the story was one of separation. Karen moved out of their home, seeking refuge with a friend as Andrew stayed behind to process the mess she had left in her wake. The days stretched on as they both tried to figure out what their next steps would be. Their daughters, Claire and Denise, were away at college, and though Andrew knew they would eventually find out, he wasn't ready to face them. Andrew spent the next few weeks focused on work, trying to keep busy, trying to avoid the emotions that seemed to flood in at every quiet moment. But deep down, he knew the only way to move forward was to confront the aftermath of Karen's betrayal head-on. The next crucial moment came when Andrew finally sat down with his daughters. They had been home for spring break, and Claire had caught wind of the tension between her parents. She wasn't stupid. She knew something was off. "Mom and Dad are getting a divorce, aren't they?" Claire asked one evening, her voice filled with concern. Andrew looked at his daughter, seeing the worry in her eyes. He had always tried to protect them, to shield them from the harshness of the world. But this was different. There was no protecting them from this. "Yes," Andrew said softly, his heart breaking at the sound of the word. "Mom and we've had some issues, and it's not something we can fix anymore." As the days passed, Andrew began to find a new sense of clarity. Though the pain of Karen's betrayal was still there, it was fading, slowly but surely. He had allowed himself to grieve, to be angry, but now he was ready to move on, to rebuild his life, his trust, and his happiness. And though Karen may have destroyed his trust, Andrew was determined to make sure that he would come out of this stronger than ever before. Stay tuned for the next part of the story, where we will explore the next steps of Andrew's journey and how he finds redemption after such a devastating betrayal. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more updates. The best is yet to come. As the days dragged on, Andrew couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief. The house, which had once been filled with the sound of his daughter's laughter and the comforting hum of family life, now felt like a hollow shell. The emptiness weighed on him, and it wasn't just the silence. It was the knowledge that everything he had believed in was a lie. The love he had for Karen, the trust they had built over 25 years, was all gone, shattered by the discovery of her affair. But he was determined to move forward, to rebuild his life, even if it meant doing so without her. The first real turning point came when Andrew decided to confront Karen one last time. He had spent weeks in turmoil, unsure of how to move on from the wreckage of his marriage. He had put his emotions on hold, choosing instead to bury himself in work and avoid the inevitable conversations he knew needed to happen. But now, after enough time had passed, he felt ready. Ready to finally hear Karen's side of things. Ready to see if there was any chance, even the slightest one, that they could salvage what was left of their relationship. They agreed to meet at a local cafe. It was public, neutral ground, and neither of them wanted to risk another scene in their home. Andrew arrived first, sitting at a small table near the window. He watched the people outside, wondering how they could go on with their lives so easily, while his world seemed to be falling apart. When Karen walked in, her face pale and tired, Andrew's heart ached. For a moment, he wanted to reach out to her, to take her in his arms and tell her that everything would be okay. But he couldn't. Not anymore. Andrew, Karen said softly as she sat down across from him. Her voice was filled with uncertainty, the cracks in their marriage now visible in every word. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I could fix it, I thought we could work through it, but I see now that I was wrong. Andrew stared at her, his eyes hardening. The anger from the past weeks resurfaced, a dull flame that still burned within him. He had heard it all before, the excuses, the guilt, the promises of change. But he wasn't sure if he could believe her anymore. You're right. You were wrong, Karen. We were wrong. All of it. The lies, the affair, the destruction you caused. It's beyond repair. Karen's eyes welled up with tears. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't think it would go this far. It was a mistake. Terrible mistake. I should have come to you, told you how I felt, but I didn't. I'm sorry, Andrew. I'm truly sorry. But the words didn't reach him. He had heard them too many times already. The pain in his chest felt like a weight that he could never lift. He had given Karen everything, and now it seemed as though that wasn't enough. His trust had been shattered, and no amount of apology could fix that. I don't know what you want me to say, Karen, Andrew replied, his voice tight. You've already made your decision. You've already shown me who you are. And I can't keep pretending that everything's okay. I can't keep living a lie. They sat there in silence for a few moments, the weight of their broken marriage hanging in the air between them. Karen's tears flowed freely now, but Andrew's heart remained hard. He had been through too much to simply forgive and forget. The betrayal ran too deep. Finally, Karen spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you think we could ever get back to what we had? Could we ever fix this? Andrew looked at her, his gaze unwavering. No, I don't think we can. What you did, it changed everything. I can't go back to the person I was before, and I can't keep living in this toxic environment. We both need to move on. The finality in his voice seemed to hit her like a slap. She looked down at the table, defeated, the reality of their situation sinking in. I understand, she said quietly, her voice hollow. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you can find happiness again. Andrew didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. They had reached the end of the road, and though it broke his heart, he knew it was the only way forward. He had to let her go, no matter how much it hurt. The weeks that followed were filled with a strange kind of numbness for Andrew. He moved through the motions of daily life, handling the logistics of their separation, meeting with lawyers and managing the practicalities of splitting their assets. But emotionally, he was adrift. The man who had once been so sure of himself, so certain of his life's path, now felt as though he were stumbling in the dark, unsure of what came next. Andrew's daughters, Claire and Denise, were a constant source of support during this time. Although they had been devastated by the news of their parents' separation, they never wavered in their love for their father. They had their own struggles to face, balancing school, their future careers, and the heartbreak of seeing their family torn apart. But they remained close to Andrew, offering him comfort when he needed it most. The reality of their fractured family became clear when they gathered for dinner one evening. Andrew could see the sadness in his daughter's eyes, the weight of everything that had happened hanging over them. They had all lost something, and there was no easy way to repair it. But as they talked, as they shared stories and memories of happier times, Andrew realized something important. They still had each other. Despite everything that had happened, despite the betrayal and the pain, there was still love in their family. It wasn't the same love as before, but it was still there. That night, Andrew sat down with his daughters and had an honest conversation about their future. He told them that they would get through this, that they would rebuild their lives, and that they would do it together. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew that they would be okay. He had to believe that, for their sake as much as for his own. The real turning point came when Andrew decided to take a step back from the pain and loss of his marriage and focus on his own future. He hadn't realized how much he had neglected his own needs, his own happiness until now. He had been so consumed by his marriage, by the life he had built with Karen, that he had lost touch with the things that had once brought him joy. Andrew began to explore new hobbies, to reconnect with friends, and to focus on his career in a way he hadn't done in years. Slowly but surely, he started to rediscover who he was outside of the role of husband and father. It wasn't an easy journey, but with each small step, he began to feel more like himself again. One of the biggest moments of personal growth came when Andrew decided to attend a local sailing club event. Sailing had always been a passion of his, something he had put on hold when he got married and had children. But now, in this new chapter of his life, he realized that he could embrace the things he loved once more. The first time he set foot on a boat again, the feeling of the wind in his hair and the salty air around him felt like freedom. It was a small thing, but it was a symbol of his newfound independence. As the months passed, Andrew's life began to take shape again. His relationship with Karen, though still strained, had found a new equilibrium. They had agreed to go through the divorce process amicably, without further animosity. But Andrew knew that the real work was internal. He had to heal from the scars left by her betrayal, and that was going to take time. One day, as he sat at his desk reviewing some work files, he received a call from Karen. She sounded different this time, more composed, more distant. "I've made a decision," she said. "I've been seeing a counselor, Andrew. I'm working on myself. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to change. I don't expect anything from you, but I wanted to tell you that I'm not the same person I was when I hurt you." Andrew listened to her words, and for the first time in a long while he felt a sense of peace. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step forward, a sign that they both could heal even if it meant moving on separately. Stay tuned for the next part of the story. If you've enjoyed the journey so far, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. The road to redemption is just beginning, and the best is yet to come. As we near the end of Andrew's journey, there's a sense of closure forming around him. The once fractured pieces of his life, his heart, and his family have slowly started to heal, though not without scars. It's been a long, difficult road, but Andrew has come to realize that growth often comes from the most painful of experiences. After Karen's call, Andrew thought long and hard about their conversation. He didn't have the answers he was looking for, and neither did she. The pain of betrayal couldn't be wiped away with words alone. But the decision to try to move forward, in whatever form that took, was one that Andrew had to make for himself. The next step would be finalizing their divorce, a necessary step for both of them to move on. There would be no grand confrontation, no angry outbursts. The years together were ending quietly, and Andrew was beginning to accept that. The fire of anger had faded, leaving behind the ashes of what had been. The final divorce papers were signed in a simple meeting. There were no dramatic arguments, no words exchanged beyond the necessary formalities. Karen's eyes were red-rimmed, her shoulders hunched as she signed her name, and Andrew could see the guilt in her face. He could feel the weight of her regret. But he wasn't angry anymore, at least not in the way he used to be. Anger was exhausting, and Andrew had learned that he didn't have the energy to carry that around anymore. What was left was sadness, a quiet sort of grief that was hard to describe. "You're still the girl's mother," Andrew said softly as they finished the paperwork. "And I'll always appreciate the good years we had together. I need space. I need to move on." Karen nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I understand."
I'm sorry, Andrew.
"I really am." Now, the road ahead was uncertain. There were days when Andrew didn't know what to do with himself. It was like a part of him had died, and now he was figuring out how to live again. But there was something freeing about it, too. He could feel the chains loosening around him, the weight lifting as he began to rediscover who he was outside of his marriage. He threw himself back into his work, taking on new projects and finding satisfaction in the challenges they brought. The long hours at the office were easier to bear now, not a way to escape but a way to build his future. He took on a leadership role in the company, his reputation as a hard worker and problem solver earning him respect among his peers. Andrew was proving to himself that he could stand tall again. But more importantly, he was learning how to stand on his own. One of the most significant changes came when he realized he could be content with his own company. After years of marriage, of focusing on family, he had neglected his own desires, his own needs. But now, with the house to himself, he had the freedom to do what he wanted, when he wanted. His sailing trips, something he had long abandoned, became his form of self-care. With each trip to the water, he felt like a part of himself was being restored. And the more he embraced his independence, the more he realized how much he had given up for the sake of his marriage. He didn't regret the years he had spent raising his daughters, or the sacrifices he had made for Karen. But he also realized that he had allowed his own life to be overshadowed by the role of husband and father. Now he could finally see himself as Andrew again, and that was worth celebrating. As the months passed, Andrew's relationship with Claire and Denise also began to shift. Though their family had been torn apart, they were all learning to adapt to the new reality. The girls had been shaken by the divorce, but Andrew was proud of how they had matured through the experience. They weren't the same young women who had left for college with their parents still together. They had grown stronger, more independent, more aware of the complexities of relationships. Claire and Denise had learned the hard way that life wasn't always fair, and people weren't always what they seemed. But in the midst of the pain, they had learned valuable lessons that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. It wasn't easy, but Andrew's bond with his daughters had deepened. They had seen him at his lowest and had watched as he rebuilt himself. In the process, they found a new respect for him. Not because he was perfect, but because he was human. His flaws didn't make him weak, they made him real. And that's what mattered most. The final moments of the story find Andrew standing on the dock, looking out over the water. The sky is painted with the soft hues of sunset, the gentle ripples of the water reflecting the fading light. He's alone, but for the first time in a long while he's not lonely. There's peace in the stillness, in the quiet understanding that life goes on, even after everything falls apart. Andrew reflects on everything that has led him here, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the anger, the healing. It hasn't been easy, but it has been worth it. He's not the same man who sat at that cafe with Karen, struggling to keep his composure as their marriage disintegrated before him. He's stronger now, more resilient, and most importantly, he knows who he is. A car pulls up behind him, and he turns to see Claire and Denise stepping out. The three of them stand together, looking out at the water. There's no need for words. They've all been through enough. They know what's important now, what really matters. Family, love, and the strength to move forward. As the sun dips below the horizon, Andrew feels a sense of closure, not just with his past, but with his future. He's ready for whatever comes next. And though the journey has been long, it's not over. The next chapter is waiting, and he's ready to write it. Andrew's story is one of pain, betrayal, and ultimately, redemption. It's a reminder that life is full of unexpected turns and challenges, but it's also full of opportunities for growth. When everything you thought you knew is ripped away, it can feel like the end. But as Andrew's story shows, sometimes the end is just the beginning of something new. Thank you all for joining me on this journey. If you've enjoyed Andrew's story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more. The road ahead may be uncertain, but with every step, we learn more about ourselves and the world around us. Stay tuned for more stories, and remember, it's never too late to rebuild.